Once again, a very pleasant good morning and welcome to our second annual symposium. And I know that you've had a phenomenal time up till now. Wasn't that last session very informative for you, as a matter of fact? It was informative for me. I enjoyed hearing them talking about what they've been doing, how they've been doing it. And we're going to continue that kind of a vein situation, finding out more about how to deal with this business. One of the areas that's most important, obviously, for you is the entry into the business. And I think we're going to ask some of our panelists to tell us, as we start out, how they entered their very first entry into the field. Because that's probably the most difficult, that first step in, whether it be as an intern or in an actual job or whatever the circumstance might be. And then also the second step is key, because that really points you in a given direction, maybe more specialized than the first general entry. How many of you are seniors here today? Juniors? Sophomores? Freshmen? Oh, so we have a very good pre-freshman. Anybody? Last year we did have, I think, a couple of people who were in the process of graduating from high school, but had been doing a lot of activity at their high school in the audiovisual field, in the communications within the high school. So they were preparing themselves maybe in the 11th and 12th grade for this business. At any rate, we're waiting for one more panelist to come in. And I'd like to, let's see, where's Larry? We're losing, is Larry around? There he is. Let's have a hand for Larry Lidwin. Some of you know him as your professor.
I knew that was going to happen.
My name is Pat Delsing. I am the chairman of the board of the Broadcast Pioneers, and I'm happy to be able to see such a nice group of young faces, of people who are in a position of wanting to do something that I was in a position of wanting to do. And it's going to become about 50 years ago, this coming September. I'll have been in this crazy business a half a century, and it's been a pleasure all the way. You heard some of the people talking in the other room about how much they enjoyed their work and their activity. I can say that never in my almost 50 years of being employed in this field did I ever look at the clock and say, it's 4 o'clock, I wish it were 5. And I know that 90% of the people probably are in that position, working to earn a living, but not necessarily enjoying what they do. So they're looking at the clock, wanting it to be later, to leave and go do other things. I was always looking at the clock and saying, it's 5, or whatever the time was. I never was a 9 to 5 type person. But whatever the time was that the program was going to conclude, I had 2 or 3 more things I wanted to do, 2 more questions, another record I wanted to play, or some commentary I wanted to make. Or interviews and things of that nature. So if you're like some of us here, I think you're going to be doing that the rest of your life. Doing something that you like, and if you're lucky, somebody will pay you, and if you're really lucky, somebody will pay you enough to live and be able to earn a living and maybe even get a very good living. At any rate, we hope that our information that we impart to you the rest of this day, as the previous activity did, will bring you maybe a clue to do something, to move in a certain direction, to make a certain activity level quickly. So that those of you who are seniors, you know, you're not too far away from graduation. And now how many of you have been doing something, whether it be as an intern or actually working part-time at a radio station, a small radio station, or a TV station? Good. I'm glad to see, you know, that's not enough, and not as many hands as I would have liked to have seen. But I'm glad to see some of you did that, and especially when you see seniors who have not literally been anywhere in this business other than on campus. And it's great to work at the campus radio or TV station. That's fantastic. It's good hands-on activity. But there's nothing like doing it in the real world. There is a difference, and you'll notice, those of you who haven't been involved at all will notice it. The seniors will notice it literally in a matter of months. But right now I'd like to get our panel underway, and we have literally a cross-section of this industry. We have a person who's the communications director here at CBS 3 and UPN 57, and she, of course, is a person you've already met and heard from, Joanne Calabria. Joanne, nice to have you with us today. Got a nice hand for her, absolutely. This next gentleman has been in the business, and you heard somebody mention his name before he was here earlier today. Bill Weber mentioned that he goes back to and before the days of. And I want each one of our panelists, and we'll start with you, Joanne, to tell us your first entry into the business. What happened, how you were able to do that, and of course maybe the second step right after that.
I mentioned to some of you in the studio that I got a journalism degree from Penn State University with the intention of being a newspaper reporter. One of the most important things that you might have heard in the first studio, which I heard loud and clear from Carol and Tom, is don't leave yourself open to whatever happens in your career. When my friends who were also in the same curriculum started to work as newspaper reporters, when I saw what they were doing, when I saw that they were working in small markets, Penn State was a little too rural for me. I needed to get back and smell bus fumes. So I wanted to come back to Philly, and that kind of limited my opportunities in terms of you just don't come out of college and work for a big city daily paper. So I looked at some other opportunities and fell in love with public relations. My first job actually was as an editor of a publication, and I was doing financial PR, working for First Pennsylvania Bank, which is now First Union. And I did financial PR for a few years before I came to the TV station and as assistant director of public relations. And I've had a number of jobs here in the communications field. What I'm doing now is I'm responsible for press relations and for community relations. So everything that is basically geared to the public, short of the on-air promotion and advertising, comes under that umbrella. But I think one of the most important things you heard today was keep yourself open, because you never know what you're going to fall in love with. Your first job is not your career path. Your first job is your opportunity to look for your career path. Because when you're inside the business, you have access, you have an ability to network that you don't have when you're a student. And you can move freely within the industry, you can try a lot of different things, and eventually you'll find that spark. When Tom and Carol said maybe 10% of you will anchor, maybe 10% of you will wind up in an on-air job, don't think of the other 90% as the consolation prize. Once you get into the business, you may fall in love with a certain aspect of the business, and you'll be thrilled, as Pat said, to be spending your life doing something you love every day. So I wish all the best of luck in that.
And Joanne, you've only been here how many years?
22 years.
Can't hold a job, can you?
I've had 10, I'm on my 10th boss. When he walked in a couple months ago, I said to him, "You're number 10." And I joked earlier that if I had known, because there's so much change, every time we got a new boss, I thought, okay, well, they're going to change the PR person. And it took me probably about 19 years to figure out that it's the PR person who does the orientation for the new general manager, so there was job security in that. But if I had figured that out earlier, I would have been a lot more relaxed the last 20 years. So.
Our next panelist, of course, as I mentioned, goes back a few years. I won't mention how many years. He's only about 64. But one thing I do know, he has been in this business. He was associated, for the most part, with a station on the other side of town at Channel 6 for many, many of those years. He's a professor at Temple University. And Lou, how did you actually get into this wild and wacky business?
I started as a non-paying intern doing sports at 5 of 8 in the morning on WPEN radio. And that meant I had to get up very early in the morning for no pay, 5 days a week, to go in town and do this high school sports report. When I finished college, I got a job. I was very fortunate. I got a job as an assistant cameraman at Channel 6. And I stayed with Channel 6 for 20-some years, about 22 years or so. Started on the camera crew, moved up, director, producer, production manager, program director. During that time, the company that owned Channel 6 was also buying more additional television stations, and so ultimately I became the program director for all of the television stations that were owned by that company. And then I was very fortunate because the man who owned all of those stations decided that he was going to sell the stations. He also owned the Inquirer newspaper, Daily News, TV Guide, 17 magazine, and so forth and so on. And he was selling the television and radio stations. And two of us who had worked there for a long time were given the opportunity of buying 4 of those stations. So for a little guy who started out for no pay, broadcasting high school sports at 5 minutes of 8 in the morning, I ended up being the president of a company that owned and operated 4 television stations.
So it was Gateway Communications,
Gateway
wasn't it?
Communications. So I just tell you, you start anywhere, and if you have the passion, if you have the desire, and obviously you do. I'm impressed with the fact that on a Saturday morning when you didn't have to get out of bed, you're here, is an indication of your interest. And can I take a moment to tell a story?
Absolutely.
You're sitting in the studio where a program originated that was syndicated across the country. And this goes back a number of years, but we remember. Mike Douglas, the name may or may not be familiar, but Mike Douglas originated a daily syndicated entertainment show here in this, not only in this building, but in this studio where you're sitting. And there was a Temple student, and I was teaching at Temple at that time, who came to work here in the documentary film unit, out of school, out of Temple. And he was a pretty funny guy, and in fact, he thought he was even funnier than the rest of us thought, but he was a funny guy. And he was upstairs working in the documentary film unit. And when a guest would not show up at the last minute to appear on the Mike Douglas show, which was taped here and then syndicated, I don't know how many, probably 100 markets, they'd call up and they'd say, get down here, we need somebody to fill, we got a 6-minute hole in the show. Get down here, we need you. And that was David Brenner, who went on to substitute for Johnny Carson, who still is doing a lot of television and a lot of personal appearances and shows in Las Vegas, Atlantic City, and the casinos and whatever. And the point I wanted to make is, he came here to work in a job that he was good at, but not what he wanted to do as a career. He was on the scene, he was available, the timing was right. And he has said to me, and I'm relaying this now to you, he said, I believe in the 3 T's. Talent, tenacity, and timing. And timing meaning meeting people, networking people, being someplace. And I could tell you, later perhaps I will, stories of Dick Clark and how he got started. And you've got the talent, or you wouldn't be here. You've got the talent to do something well within you. You've got to be tenacious. You can't give up. And then you've got to look for the timing, be there, and take advantage of that opportunity when it comes.
The right time, the right place is probably the key to succeeding in whatever field you happen to be going into. You're going into the communications field, but being at that door, walking in the front door when somebody's walking out the side door, just told the boss he's going. He's leaving for whatever reason. And if you happen to be standing there at that moment, you might be the person, and that's happened many, many times, you might be the person who will take over that particular position. And it occurred to your friend, Dick Clark, the gentleman you work with. He was working on the air on WFIL radio, which was down the hall from the TV station, the TV studios, where American Bandstand, or it was Bandstand at that time, was going on. And the host, all of a sudden, was not going to be the host of that program. And they needed a replacement, like yesterday, the next morning. And he'll be able to tell you even more directly the exact moments that it occurred. And Dick Clark stepped in. So there you have, he had the talent, he had the tenacity, he had the desire, and he happened to be at the right place at the right time, where today he is a multi-zillionaire not only as on-the-air talent, which he still does, but also a producer of so many very successful programs. So what he just mentioned to you, the 3 T's are so key to success in this field, for that matter, or any other field. But you want to make sure that you're always ready. We'll talk more about diversifying. They mentioned it earlier today. We'll talk about that later on. But right now, let's get to our next panelist, who goes back a few years. I won't mention years. With me, I can mention it. As I said, I've been in the business 50 years. I started when I was 10, of course. But Larry Littman goes back quite a few years, and he has diversified in so many ways. Been in broadcasting for years, was a news anchor and reporter right here at KYW Radio for many, many years, and then decided he also wanted to teach and impart his knowledge and expertise to students, and he's been doing that successfully as a professor at Rowan University. Larry Littman. Larry?
Thank you, Pat. First, let me say, sitting next to Lou Klein is a legend, so if you haven't had him at Temple or you don't know of Mr. Klein, he's more than just, I can tell you as a young man growing up in this area, we all knew of Lou Klein at Channel 6. And the fellow to my left, Dave Madden, is probably the hardest working radio reporter in this city. So Dave may tell you that himself. But I just want to tell you, the reason I was late, and I apologize, is I knew it was going to happen if I went up on the second floor, because this is home. I haven't worked here in 12 years, but KYW News Radio is still a major part of me, and I talk to the folks here often. And I won't take too much time, I promise, because Frank will go nuts back there. But I remember, as Tom Lemaine said earlier, the day that I started in commercial radio, and timing is everything. I was playing baseball at a college in Iowa. I'm going back there, and you're going to say, why am I going back there? We're going back for a reunion, but the date was May 23rd, 1966. I injured my knee playing ball. Our games were carried. We played 100 games a year, and almost all the games were carried on radio. The color announcer had just taken a job in Madison, Wisconsin, and the play-by-play announcer, I walked over, I said, well, who's taking Terry Shopley's place? He said, we don't have anybody. I said, can I fill in for him? And Dave Stillman said, do you have any announcing experience? And I would never lie, and I said, yes. In high school, I was the PA announcer for football. So that day, I did the color on the game. I've been in radio really ever since. I was fortunate enough, I worked in Iowa for a few years, but I knew on September 21st, 1965, long before you were born, that I wanted to work at KYW News Radio. And that date is significant because that is the day that KYW News Radio was born. And I was in Iowa at the time, but I said, I want to work at that station. So fast forwarding, and I worked for Pat for a short time as well at WCAM back in those days. And some years later, I was doing public information. I've actually skipped way ahead because I went back to school, as Tom Lemaine said, because you want to stay on top of current events and you want to make sure that you have the necessary background to do what you do. I went back to school after working at ABC News in New York, and actually I'm going to take you back just a couple seconds. In 1967, I came here and applied for a job, and I had very little experience. And Bill Branson, the late Bill Branson, who was another one of my mentors, took me on the side. I was 22 years old, so now you know how old I am. Bill said, Larry, you need a little more experience. Go get it. So he meant go back to Iowa or go to North Carolina. I applied for a job in New York and somehow got a job at ABC Radio in New York, where I was a writer and eventually became a reporter. And then I left there, went back to school and got a degree in public relations. But in 1980, I was playing in a benefit softball game. And I was playing third base, and the coach for the other team coaching third base was a man named Nelson Cohen. Nelson at that time was the managing editor of KYW News Radio. And he said, Larry, I'd like you to come up to the station at 5th and Market. We'd like to offer you a job. And I said, there's no way that I'm going to leave what I'm doing to go to KYW News Radio, even though that was my dream job. Well, after a few weeks, Nelson called me again. He said, just come in, spend a couple of hours with us. Come in on the desk at midnight. And Jay Lloyd was working that night. Jay is still here, a young man by the name of Larry Rosen, well, Larry's not young anymore, but he was young then. He's doing games on CNA and some other cable stations, and and some 76ers. He did the Phillies a few years ago. I came in that night, and Nelson showed up about 7 in the morning. And he said, "What do you think?" And I was waiting to hear money. No matter what he said, I was going to take the job. And that's how I got my start in radio. And I will tell you, this is home. This is where I spent, be careful, I said, because my wife hears this, this is where I spent the best years of my life. And walking in the door today was just like coming home.
Thank you very much, Larry. Another gentleman who has found a home right here at KYW is Dave Matton. How did you enter the business, Dave?
Well, I'll tell you how I got started at this radio station, believe it or not, full time. I took his job. He went...
Timing is everything, right?
Exactly. I mean, Larry went, I think this was when you went into public relations or something? The Labor Department. And I was working here part-time at the time, and Steve Butler, who was in one of his many tours of duty as a manager here, called me in and said, "You're going to take Larry's position." Whoa, I went full-time. I also worked here 3 years part-time to get there. So yeah, timing is everything. My first job, my first exposure to radio actually was an unpaid position as a freshman in high school. I just dogged the people at WIBG and just did anything they wanted me to do. Didn't matter, didn't care. And I guess the one unique story that came out of that was my first paycheck actually came from CBS while I was a freshman in high school. The news department gave me this little real tape recorder, and they said, "Go out and stick microphones in people's faces." Well, there was an NFL negotiation session. The labor union was negotiating in Philadelphia on a Saturday. And I'm just sitting there waiting for something to happen, and the phone rings in a telephone booth. I picked up the phone, like, "Hello, it's CBS Radio." And they said, "Are you covering the NFL negotiation?" 13-year-old kid said, "Yep." He said, "Can you file a piece for us?" I had no idea what the hell he meant. All right, and I said, "Well, how do I do it?" And it's Win Elliott on the phone. And he said, "Well, you just tell us what's going on. If you've got a piece of tape, you put it in the middle." And you cut, make a long story short, I made my first $100. And back then, $100 was $100. And my father still has a copy of the first check I ever made from CBS. But that was my first gig. Then I went to college, went to Temple, graduated from there, went down to Vineland as a disc jockey, then went to Doylestown doing news, got fired from a couple of jobs here in Philadelphia at WWDB and WFIL. But I came to KYW in 1985. Oh, no, I'm sorry, 86. That's right. January 86. And it has been a love affair. This is my hometown, and I've always wanted to work here. Much like Larry said, I remember the day that KYW went all news because I was in Philadelphia. I was at home for lunch from school and watched it on Channel 3 when they actually changed the format. Marcia Rose was actually reporting on this new radio station that was going to premiere here. And
Bill Weber was the last.
Bill Weber played the last record on KYW. But
you can hear it on our website.
Right?
You can hear it on the website.
There you are. But I mean, I've always wanted to work here. At times, never thought I was ever going to get in the door. Kind of screwed myself up a couple of times when I had opportunities. But just like everybody else here is saying, take advantage of the opportunities that are there. And whatever you do, you better love what you're doing in this business because you are going to work your tail off for not a lot of money at first. Maybe not even a lot of money when you get up to this level, the way things are going in the business. There's a lot of consolidation. There's a lot of cost cutting going on. So you better love what you're doing. Have a backup plan because if you don't, you better have an escape hatch. But this is a great business if you really want.
I remember when my father, when I told him I was going into this business, he said, "Well, that's nice," and really was happy for me. He said, "But you ought to get a real job to hold you over in case this thing doesn't work." And fortunately, things did work. And among many of the different things I've done over the course of time, was to be working for this company. when they made that switch over, the radio station made the switch over to, actually, they were being purchased, or it's a long story. I'll just tell you that they, KYW was here, left, went to Cleveland, and then 10 years later came back as a result of an FCC decision, and they had to come back to take over this radio station while RCV went back to Cleveland, where they had come from. And there was a morning when the official transaction took place. The FCC sent a telegram to both stations, both companies, saying you have to move in 2 weeks. They had to move lock, stock, and barrel. The company here had to go back to Cleveland. Company in Cleveland had to come back here, which was KYW. And I was on the air the morning that the official change took place. And I said, good morning, this is WRCB, 1310 kilocycles on your dial, owned and operated by RCA, and so on and so forth. And went to the conclusion with just that little bit that you normally do in the morning years ago. And then I paused for about 3 seconds and said, good morning, this is KYW. At 1310 kilocycle, not 1310, 1060. I said 1310.
Tell them why you said
I will in a second. But anyway, 1060 kilocycles on your dial, owned and operated by Westinghouse. And what occurred there, it's too long a story to go into now, but what occurred there, two of the largest conglomerates in the country were forced to switch one of their properties by the FCC because of collusion that occurred 10 years before. But this station has a very interesting history. And it's been here for many, many years and continues to be one of the most successful, because shortly after they made the switch back, Westinghouse had a station in New York doing all news that had just begun, an all news format, which was rare in those days in the entire country. And they decided, since this station had the lowest ratings in the Philadelphia area, matter of fact, the joke in those days, Joanne, was the police radio in Philadelphia had a better rating and more listeners than KYW. I'm not making it up. That was the running joke in Philadelphia. So they said, we have very little to lose, and we'll just move with a totally new concept, all news all the time. It took them about 20 to 25 years to make a profit. And that's gospel truth. It was a very expensive proposition, but they were a large company. They had one of the best money-making TV stations in the country, KYW TV. And they were able to afford 20 to 25 years of broadcasting all news at a major loss factor. But eventually it turned a profit and has been doing very well ever since. So the thing is that you've heard 4 people mention already, get involved. Internship, it is priceless. The seniors now, you're in a difficult situation, but your freshmen and sophomore and even your juniors, please, for the rest of your time as a student, find time, whether it be a weekend, evenings, overnight, squeeze it into your schedule to be an intern someplace in this marketplace if you can. And even if you had to travel an hour on a weekend to go to a station in Delaware, something like that, do it. It is priceless. It will pay you back 1,000,000 times over in years to come. Because you'll be there, you'll be in the situation, you'll be working, even as an intern, or if you're lucky, get a job where they'll pay you for the period of time you're involved. But do that, because it's very, very important. It's key. Our next panelist, of course, is our final panelist, but he is, you saw him earlier today, possibly in the other room briefly, but mainly he is the executive producer here of the morning show. And we want to welcome Matt Pitzer. Matt, nice to have you with us, and your entry into the field.
Thank you very much. I'm the newcomer among this panel. I'm just going on maybe 9 years in the business. And when I was in college, all I knew was I wanted to be in communications, but I had no concept of where that was going to take me. And I guess I assumed radio first. That's what I'm going to do. So I think my sophomore year in college, I'm from Newcastle, Pennsylvania, which is in western PA, right near the Ohio border. And we had a small 3,000-watt radio station there that played oldies. And, of course, I didn't recognize most of the names on the playlist, but thought, let me volunteer, let me be an intern. It was just during a Christmas break, just to see if this is what I might want to do. And right off the bat, I just thought, I can't do this. They have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. Little did I know what would happen later in my career, but I saw these hours aren't going to work for me. I was very naive at that point and thought, oh, I want to try something different. So the very next summer, I got an internship at WPXI Television in Pittsburgh. And I think from day one, when I walked in the door and saw all the excitement, you know, the photographers and the reporters running around and rushing to the scene of breaking news and putting the whole thing together and seeing this come together for, you know, just within a matter of minutes or an hour for the 5 o'clock news, I knew this is what I want to do. I've got to be in television news. But where do I begin? I have no idea. Do I want to be a reporter? Do I want to be a photographer? What do I want to do? So went through this internship, spent some time in the weather department, spent some time on the assignment desk where they gathered the news, and just, again, I still was kind of still unsure of exactly how I was going to break into the business because I didn't know what I was good at. I mean, I knew I loved to write, but just still had no concept of what to do. So a reporter took me under his wing and showed me the ropes out in the field and said, maybe you ought to try reporting, or you seem to have, where do your interests lie? And I said, well, at this point, I kind of enjoyed weather. And so he said, well, apply for a weather job. You have no idea where that will take you. So naive me thinking, okay, well, I'm going to graduate in 2 months and I need a job. So let me apply for a weekend weather job at a television station in Youngstown, Ohio, which is not too far from my hometown. You know, I'm sure they'll hire me. You know, I'm enthusiastic and young, and I want to do this. And so I go and audition and just, you know, in front of a green screen like that, and had never done that before. And of course, it was awful. I had no idea what I was talking about, and just kind of. And the news director pulled me aside and said, you know, do you have any idea what you're talking about? And I said, well, I can learn. I'm eager. He said, well, okay, well then I recommend you go back to Penn State and get a Bachelor of Science in Meteorology and come back to me in about 4 years. Well, that wasn't good enough for me. So I thought, there's no way. I can't go back to school. And, you know, I just want to get into it. So he asked me about, again, he sort of asked me what my interests were. Told him I liked to write, and I was really interested in the news, and obviously CNN was new at that time, and I'd be watching CNN all the time and reading newspapers, and he said, well, you know, just keep in touch and good luck, and so every opportunity I could, you know, something big happened in the news, or I read a very interesting article about something going on in the news, I would write a letter to this news director in Youngstown, and finally. I get a call one day, this news director, Gary, wanted to talk to me. And he said, you know what, I have to tell you, you're the most persistent person I've ever met. He said, it got to the point that, there's the Matt Pizza resume again, because every position that was posted on their website, I would apply for, whatever it was. And he just laughed. He said, you applied for absolutely everything we have. And he said, and I've got to tell you, even by your letters that you've written to me, I can tell that you are a good writer. And he said, this is one of the best written letters I've ever received, the very last one. He said, so I decided the next job that I have is yours. Well, it happened to be a weekend assignment editor, and I started there. So I did this, and where, you know, I'm all by myself in this newsroom, and I'm supposed to come up with ideas that are going to lead the 6 o'clock news for that evening. You know, so I have no idea what news, what should be a lead story, and so fortunately, you know, I had some seasoned reporters that kind of led me along, and I got really good at it, but just knew this isn't what I want to do. And so what I would do was, while the reporters were out covering their stories, would kind of line up in the rundown in the computer for the 6 o'clock producer the different stories that we were covering for the day. And this producer comes in and says, well, have you ever thought of producing a show? And I said, well, no, I don't really know what you do. You know, I've kind of watched, but he goes, well, it's interesting because they taught me how to get into the lineup of the show, and he said, well, you put in these stories that you're covering for the day, but he said, honestly, I'm not changing the order when we put this on the show. He said, you have this knack for understanding how the shows flow together, or the stories flow together, and what seems to be more important than the next. He said, you know, you should be a producer. And from that day on, I was a producer. I went into the news director and said, I think I want to try producing. So he said, you know what, the 6 o'clock producer is off next week. You're going to do it. This is unheard of. I mean, you would never, on one of your main newscasts, put someone who's never done this before on there. He had so much confidence in me. Of course, he said, well, I'll help you along. Well, he was in his office the whole day. So it was kind of sink or swim. So sure enough, I put together my first show, and it sure had a little bumps and bruises. You know, you have to learn as you go. But from that day on, I've been a producer and never looked back. It was just one of those moments where, you know, I finally found my niche and knew exactly what I wanted to do. So from then on out, I just kind of moved up. I was producing the morning news, and you know, I laughed about back when I didn't want to get into radio because of the hours, because they had to be there at 5 o'clock in the morning. I got to tell you, more than half of my career, I've worked hours overnight, where I had to, my in time was 11 o'clock at night or midnight, and then you'd stay until you could leave. And that's kind of how it ended up with the evolution of television and how important morning news has become, that, you know, that's where all my opportunities were, and I seem to excel in that. So, you know, I would spend 2 years in one station, and another opportunity would come up at another station, and, you know, I'd have to start all over again on the morning show. So I would be finally getting decent hours, and then start over again. And then just 2 years ago when I came to CBS 3, the same thing. I came in as a noon producer. I produced the noon news here, and would work like 4 a.m. to about 12:30, and then you're doing such a great job. We want to give you more. We want to give you a better opportunity. We want you to be able to show your creativity. So we need you to come in even earlier. So I ended up producing the 5 to 6 a.m. news here at CBS 3. But in the long run, you know, just 6 months later, then I was promoted to become the executive producer. So I get to oversee the whole broadcast. So, you know, obviously it paid off for me. But, you know, the one thing that I learned from the very beginning is it's not a 9-to-5 job, and anyone who would, no one, I don't think that you'd ever talk to in this business will ever tell you that. But, you know, get used to working long hours, but the payoff is if it's something you love, you're not even going to notice the time fly. I mean, I never watch the clock. Of course, I have to watch the clock to make sure that I have everything done before the show goes on the air, but time flies. I mean, everyone out of the business that talks to me say, how do you do it? How do you stay awake? I said, you don't understand. We're busy from the moment we walk in to the moment we leave, and if it's something you like, the hours don't bother you. And then you finally find your niche, like I did, and then eventually you'll get into the position that you want to be, and you will pick the hours that you want to eventually. But just be persistent. I mean, that's how I got my first job, and you know, it definitely paid off for me. But don't worry that day one you don't know exactly what you want to do. There's so many opportunities, especially now with the internet and cable, and you know, you're going to be able to find what you want. You know, just what you're good at. You will excel, and just, you know, don't worry about that. You don't have to lay out your entire career right now. You know, I'm still learning. I don't know what I'm going to do 5 years from now. So
persistence does pay off. That's the moral of that story, and of all the stories that have been mentioned. Also, diversification. Be prepared. Do as much as you can do of a varied nature in this business. I'll give you one quick story, and then we'll open it up for questions because we are running a little long. The radio station, as a matter of fact, Joanne had mentioned earlier that she's worked under, 10 new managers, GMs, and so forth, and you kind of roll with the punches along that line. Being in the background, sometimes you're better off because they're not looking at you on the camera or listening to you on the air and saying, I like or don't like that person for whatever their reasons, and all of a sudden you might be out of a job. But if you diversify, and if you basically do a variety of things and can do a number of different things within this industry, there's a good chance you're going to roll with that punch, and you're going to last and stay at a given location or be able to move to another place. A quick example of something like that is, guy walks in, he's the new general manager at a radio station, comes in, takes over, and somebody like Joanne takes him around to meet the different people who are working there at the station. This is a radio station. He walks in, the morning show, walks in, there's a guy there on the air, they introduce one another, and says hello and who he is and so forth, leaves that particular studio to go to meet some of the other people who work in the offices and so forth, and as he's walking out of that studio, says to the person who's showing him around, you know, he's not really what I think we need as a morning person. There's something that is not there, and I want to put a person in the morning that's going to be a lot better, so we can really grow with this radio station. So as he walks, meets a few other people in the office area, then goes into the sales department, and they open up the books. And he had met Joe Smith, or whatever the person's name is on the air, and he's looking over the books over the sales activity, and he sees this one person, Sam so-and-so, and he says, wow, this is amazing. This person, he's brought in X amount of dollars. You know, they saw the total that he has sold in the last 6 months. And he said, wow, now who's this person? He says, oh, that's Joe Smith, our morning man. He sells on the side. He's, in addition to being on the air, he's in our sales department. And he says, you know, I think he might do very well as a morning person. I've changed my mind. The dollar sign changed his mind, saved that guy his job. That's a true story, basically. And it happens again and again. In a small station years ago, the person who brought in the most money was the person most valued in the minds of the owner, the program director, the general manager. So sales is a big area. You might want to consider using sales as that backdrop for you, as that kind of a setup situation, so that if being on the air doesn't work, you might get a job in their sales or in their overall marketing activity or in their public relations activity. So there's no end to what you can do, but if you have that as a background, if you've thought about it and done something pertaining to that, when the day comes that they're going to change everybody on the air, you're going to have a shot maybe at doing something else in that business. You wanted to mention something about Dick Clark real quick, and then we'll open it up for questions. Wanted to refer to something specific.
Well, you told the story of how Dick was a radio disc jockey, and Dick came to the station at WFIL right out of college. So he was a young man. And an opportunity occurred because the man who was hosting it wasn't American Bandstand, it was Bandstand, it was a local show, got in trouble and was taken off the air overnight, and Dick stepped in, and that was it. So I go back to the timing. But Dick, when the show became a network program, which was about a year after Dick became the host locally, decided that he would go up to New York one day and talk to the man who was hosting the show that was on the ABC network immediately preceding Bandstand. And it was a game show, and the day he got there, the man who was the host said, I'm really in trouble. He said, I just lost my warm-up announcer, my voiceover announcer, and he said, I've got to find somebody, I've got to find somebody very, very quickly. And Dick said, I know someone who has had experience in Philadelphia. Times have turned a little bad. He's now a maitre d' in a restaurant, but he wants to get back into broadcasting. And I'll bet that he can start tomorrow, if you need him, up here in New York as your announcer. And that's how Ed McMahon got his job with Johnny Carson. And Johnny Carson was doing a show called Who Do You Trust? And when Johnny Carson then moved from that ABC show to NBC to do The Tonight Show, Ed McMahon went with him. It was just another example of timing. And there will be a time for all of you. And I didn't say this the first time around, and some of you are students in classes that I teach at Temple, but I say this to you, and I say this absolutely with all sincerity from the bottom of my heart. If you want to get into this field badly enough, and you've heard the stories, you've heard the getting up at 3 in the morning, you've heard the working at weekends, you've heard the working holidays, whatever the out, but if you want to do this, and if you've got the desire strongly, and if you have the passion, there are jobs. If you don't, then you aren't going to make it in this field, because that's what's required. You don't have to be a genius. We always joke in our business, it's the C students who are really running this business. You don't have to be a genius. You don't have to be the best student. I said this in class one day, not too long ago. Someone in the back of the room raised their hand and said, you'll be happy if I get a C? I said, if you're happy getting a C, I'm happy if you get a C. If you want to do this badly enough, if you're willing to work in a small market, or work in a low job in a big market or whatever it takes. If you want to do this, there are more jobs in this business today, more opportunities than there ever were when I started, and that's more than 50 years ago. And everybody said, oh, it's easy, you got in the business when it was just beginning. That's true. I got into the business when it was just beginning, but there are more opportunities today. Made mention. There's cable. There used to be 3 television stations in Philadelphia. Now how many stations are there? Not counting the 50 or 60 or 70 cable networks. So there are jobs. I see it. I think half the people who work here are Temple graduates or Rowan graduates or local college graduates who are right here in this station and the stations around town. You've got to say to yourself, I want to do this, and I want to do it with whatever it takes to get there.
All right, we'd like to open it up for questions, and then we'll have some questions. We'll break for lunch in about 10 minutes or so, and then we'll have Mark Howard joining us for lunch, and he'll be our luncheon speaker as well. Let's go for questions. You had your hand up first. Go ahead.
My question is...
I want you to stand up and tell us your name as well.
Hi, I'm Renee. My question is for you about the morning show. And I wanted to know about your role as executive producer and what exactly jobs does that entail?
Okay, well, as the executive producer, I oversee the producers who actually put together the show, and that's the job that I used to hold, where what a producer does is, at the beginning of their day, they look over the shows from the night before and take a look at, to get up to date on what's been going on locally in the news. And then at the same time, then they try to figure out how to present that the next morning, updating stories. In television, we subscribe to different news services and news organizations that provide us with video, like CNN, and then our network, CBS, also provides us with video. So on our computers, there's a constant update of all of the new information and new video that's available to us. And especially with the war, this has been very important, where for us, a lot of activity happens overnight while everyone else is sleeping. We're constantly getting the updates. So what we do is you pick and choose what you think are the most compelling and the newest elements to present. So when someone wakes up in the morning and turns on our show at 5 a.m., they get the very latest information. So you assemble a show and put in the news and with graphics, and you pick video, and we assign our reporter to a story that's happening maybe locally, something that's new that's going on. But the producer is basically in charge of the actual show content and a lot of the writing for the individual stories. And then my role is to oversee all of that, to make sure that we're all on the same page, and that use my expertise to help them pick the correct stories and make sure the reporter's on the right story. And then once the show is on the air, just kind of oversee everything that's happening. And if something changes or breaks or whatever, then we roll with it and make that change. And then I get to make that decision to frustrate or ruin the producer's show by changing the whole entire lineup, by changing everything around it and maybe covering something different.
Any other questions? Here, stand up and tell us who you are.
My name is Krista Vanelli. I'm a Temple student. And my question's for David, Madam. When you're putting a story together, I feel like every reporter has a unique reporting style. What do you look for when you're putting it together? With something, details or a view that you go for to making yours different than the person over at Channel 6 or reporting for any other radio station?
Well, the thing here is that we have a unique opportunity because we're radio, number one. We're constrained time-wise. Especially during war, we've been particularly constrained. Our normal limits on stories that we put together are about 40 to 45 seconds, whereas the typical TV package runs anywhere between a minute 15 and a minute 30. During the war, we've been told to keep the packages to 30 seconds. So you have to tell an entire story in half a minute, preferably with at least one piece of sound. Not an easy thing to do. What I usually try to do is just find the top 2 or 3 points that are coming out, if it is just a plain and simple story. Put them together, find a piece of sound, plug it in. when you're dealing with something that has two divergent points of view, that becomes even more difficult. We have rotating shows, and there are different versions of the story in front of every show. So if I'm doing something that has a point-counterpoint, for example, I may highlight one point of view in one story, one point of view in another, and balance it in the third. But I will always make sure that there is some mention of both sides in every story, so that there is some kind of a balance. It's not perfect, but it's probably the fairest way we could do it. Larry, you probably approached it.
Yeah, but if I might jump in, and I'll tell you, I said I was 22 when I got the job at ABC. Bill Grantham said, go get a job at a smaller market. I went up there. But a couple things, and it really is being in the right place at the right time. But interest, information, and impact, there are three key words when you're reporting news. Information, because you're providing information for your listener. Information, interest, it should be of interest, and does it have impact, and how many people does it have impact on, and if you're writing for radio, and really you should do this if you become a print journalist, you want to write in picture words. But David just mentioned something. The way I wound up at ABC, they actually gave me on-air auditions. Now, I know this may be hard for you to believe, but back in 1967 and 68, there really wasn't live television, and there was very little live reporting from the field in radio. It was packaged, as David said. Well, they would send me down here to cover sports right after the Spectrum opened, and my pieces had to run between 38 and 42 seconds. And I did. Almost everything I did on a live shot in the middle of a 3-minute and 15-second show, they would throw it to me, I would do my piece, and always got out on time, and that was the reason that they hired me up there, is because I could read a clock. And what we're doing is something that was called back then Rosers, Radio On-Scene Reports. And again, it was before live, when really, as we know it today, on KY Radio, so much is live on television, you were cutting your teeth on live television.
You have to worry about timing. Like writing a commercial. You have 30 seconds or 60 seconds to tell the full story about a particular product, and you want to tell it in such a way that you're able to sell it to the people. With news, you have to, in the first 10 seconds, tell them what the story is, in like a sentence and a half, and then elaborate on that in the remaining 20, 25 seconds, or if it's a minute, the remaining 45 seconds.
Carol said it best in the other room. When you're telling a story on radio or television, she's looking in the camera, she's telling her friend the story, so that everybody can hopefully, as many people as possible can understand the story. That was Mr. Rogers who said when he looks in the camera, he's talking to one person, and as far as he was concerned, the holiest land in the world was between him and the TV set at home that people are watching. And that's what you have to keep in mind in our profession.
Other questions? I mean, we've answered all of your questions. We've been very, very good, apparently, here this morning. Go ahead.
Okay, this is another question for you. I'm sorry, I'm interested in producing.
Oh, if you're interested in producing, he's the person you want to talk to.
You have a resume with you?
Yeah, you talked about being a slave to ratings. How much creative leeway do you have in coming up with show ideas for the morning show?
Well, you know, creativity is a big part of it, because when it comes down to it, in this market, for example, in the morning, we go head-to-head with Channel 6 and Channel 10. And we all basically deliver the same stories when it comes to maybe the national and local stories for the most part, the big stories. If it's a big story, you're going to see it on all three stations, or five actually. But in the morning, for example, that gives you a better opportunity to have a personality and be more creative, because the show is so long, and you sort of want to have a balance between a broadcast where you tell the news, but also a show where you're entertaining people, because people are just getting up and maybe they don't want to be bombarded with, all these people were killed overnight, or there's shootings and murders and fires, and so you have to try to soften that up a bit, and that's where we have, the type of morning anchor is different than your evening anchor as well, where they are more personality driven, and they get an opportunity to show their personality. So my job as a producer is to create opportunities for them to show their personality. Even just in the way I put my show together, where of course you have to update people on the latest news at the beginning of the show. But then towards the later part of the show, later part of the hour, you get more of an opportunity to put more, fun stories or interesting video or create segments or interviews that give them an opportunity to have fun with it as well. So we try to also have fun, because we figure if we're having a good time, our audience is having a good time. And we joke behind the scenes and saying, when we put our show together, it's all about us. We want to entertain ourselves, But again, we figure if we're enjoying ourselves, that shows on the air, and hopefully you're also enjoying yourselves as well. So we can also update you on the news, but maybe entertain you a little bit as well.
That also goes to being on the air. You want to provide information and entertainment at the same time. So if you're enjoying what you're doing, there's a good chance that the audience will enjoy as they listen or watch you. And we can't stress enough, and I think each panelist has indicated to you that diversify. Be prepared for that moment when somebody's going to call you to do X instead of Y. When I first started, most of the people coming into the business, into radio then, wanted to be a disc jockey. Okay? That was primarily the main desire of most of the people coming into the field of radio. Now, what happened, they'd go to a radio station and they apply for a job, take an audition, and there were no openings for a DJ. But there was an opening for news, because not that many young people coming out of college or wanting to get into the industry wanted to do news in those days. But they would take the news job, because it was a job, number one, they got into the field they wanted to get into, but their whole desire was, I'll be a news person until the DJ leaves, and maybe I'll get the DJ job. And that was a norm in the first maybe 10, 15 years of my involvement in the industry. Watergate changed that drastically. By that time I was a general manager and so forth. More people came into my station auditioning or wanting a job. They wanted a news job because the investigative reporter was king then. Woodward, all of a sudden changed the image of an investigative reporter. So a lot of people coming out of college wanted to be that investigative reporter to start out with, as a matter of fact. Not just go, using the route normally, being a reporter and finally lifting yourself up to be an investigative reporter for your station, radio, and or TV. So it was amazing. We had people coming in who wanted to be a reporter, wanted to be in news, and we didn't have maybe an opening that moment. We had a DJ. They would take the DJ job only because they wanted to be inside until a news position opened up. It's amazing the way the change occurred, and it all was a result of Watergate, the Watergate activity. So that if you go in with something in mind right now that you think you want to do, make sure that you do a lot of other things in preparation. Prepare to do and be almost anyone in any field in communications, in broadcasting. Because there might be a time later on where all of a sudden you'll change your mind, or the opportunity will be there for you to do something other than what you had a fixed idea in your mind that you wanted to be. I can tell you, I was blessed. I was very lucky in many, many ways in this business. Nowhere in my wildest dreams when I first entered the field did I think I would, A, manage a station, or even more wild and crazy, own a radio station. Well, I had the good fortune to be able to start as a disc jockey, and because of where I worked, if you were a disc jockey at that station, you also had to do news sometime during your shift, and you had to do sports sometime during your shift. So it got to the point where I was doing a variety of things, all in the learning process. And we had programming format whereby in the daytime we had what we called middle-of-the-road music. And at 6 o'clock, we changed formats in the radio station. From 6 until 7, there was news, sports, and special information. At 7 o'clock, we had a spiritual program, playing spiritual songs. And the Dixie Hummingbirds, Swan Silvertones, I played them just like I played Frank Sinatra earlier in the afternoon. So I was Deacon Delsey from 7 until 8. And then we had a program called Swingin' in the Groove from 8 o'clock until 11. And that was rhythm and blues. So I played rhythm and blues. How Come My Dog Don't Bark When You Come Round was some of the great songs of those days. And then at 11 o'clock, from 11 to midnight, I went rocking around midnight. I was playing the rock and roll songs, which was rhythm and blues turned inside out, and it became rock and roll, known as rock and roll back in the early 50s. But because I did all of that, later on I was able to do sports for many, many years, broadcasting games from China, from Japan, things that I would never have dreamed possible. The only reason I was lucky enough and successful in that sense is because those first couple of years in the business prepared me for all the eventualities that came on. So make sure that you diversify yourself. Learn as much as you can. Now, I want to quickly ask Lou to talk about internship. Again, I can't stress how important that is. So would you give a quick blip on internship? I know you're very much involved in that.
Well, thank you. I can tell you that a number of polls have been taken with people.
Lou, hold on one second. Dave's got to go to work, so I just want to thank him very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And Brian, do you have something for Dave? Go ahead. I'm sorry, Lou, go right ahead.
Just want to say, a number of polls have been taken with people who are in our industry, asking them what is it that they look for in candidates and applicants for entry-level jobs. And there are two things. And number one, well, I guess they're both number one. One or two is, have they served an internship? Have they had some experience? Have they gotten some feel for what the business world is really like? So I strongly, strongly urge any kind of an internship. Pat, you mentioned weekends, temporary, part-time, whatever it is. The second thing is the ability to write. Write memos, write letters, write news, write copy, write advertising, but the ability to write. So an internship and concentration on the ability to write are the two things which constantly turn up when surveys are done as to what employers are looking for with entry-level candidates.
I'd like to ask the rest of our panel to give a quick 1 minute. You're limited to a commercial here, but tell them what they need to know in your mind to get into this business.
Well, I agree with Luke Klein on the internships, and the Rowan students will tell you. I want to take just 30 seconds to piggyback on something Tom Lemaine said earlier. I really believe the reason I got the job at KYW back in 1979, 1980, when I was playing third base there, is because when I left ABC, I went back to school and I got a master's degree in educational public relations. Very few people have that. Only 3 colleges in the country offer that. And at the time, I didn't know that that's what Nelson Cohen had in mind. Rika Dufus was the education reporter here at KYW. She was leaving for maternity leave. They weren't sure she was coming back. And I said to Nelson, when I agreed to take the job that morning, I said, I'll come here to KYW, but I do not want to cover education. He said, oh, we have Rika Dufus. Well, he didn't lie to me. He had Rika Dufus for another 2 weeks. So I went up covering education here for 10 years, and I truly believe if I had not gone back to school and gotten that degree in educational public relations, I would never have gotten a job here at KYW.
Matt?
I'd say right now an important tool for you to remember to keep up to date on is the internet, and I think that helped me in the beginning, and I think right now if you keep an eye on the internet is very helpful for making contacts. But you can email, you can call, you can send things, you can at least keep in touch with the different people that you might want to stay in contact with. But I would say that has become such a huge deal in job seeking right now. And I think that's not going to change anytime soon. But then that way you can find out more about the different organizations that you're interested in too. So I think right now the internet is a very important.
The industry has changed so much, and one of the good things about the changes is that it's provided so many new and additional opportunities that weren't here 5 years ago, let alone 10, 20, or 30. And before I introduce our panelist for some last comments about what she thinks you should do, I would like to ask you to join me in thanking Joanne Calabria for, number one, being such a gracious host, and she worked so hard to prepare this thing, and it was all done with you in mind, so we can in one way or another help you learn more about this business and help you get into it. And Joanne, again, thank you very much. A nice hand, please, for Joanne. Some of your suggestions to some of the people who want to be maybe in a position similar to yours or anywhere in the industry.
First of all, you're very welcome. When I was in college, my mother used to say to me, it's not what you know, but who you know. And I was very independent at that time, and my parents were not well connected. Neither of them had ever been to college, never worked in an office before. But they knew somebody who delivered papers, who was head of the delivery department at the Bulletin. And they wanted to call him to try and get me an interview. And I said, absolutely not, I want to do this on my own. Once I started to work, I realized how important contacts are. And what you know is important, but who you know is also important. And that's why you should be networking. That's why you should be meeting people. That's why you should be coming to events like this. For every desk assistant job that we post, which is usually the entry-level position in our newsroom, we get 50 or 60 resumes. They don't interview 50 or 60 people, but they do interview people who have experience. You know, a lot of times the experience is very similar. The educational background is very similar, but they do interview the people who've done internships. And they do interview the people who have someone in the building who knows somebody who goes down to the newsroom and says, I can't get you this job, but I can get you the interview. And I do that for people all the time. Somebody calls me and says, this is a good kid. In fact, someone in News Radio came down the other day and said one of my students is looking for an internship. We have a huge number of intern applications. But because she was recommended by Mark Abrams in News Radio, I said, fine, we'll make sure she gets an internship. So that's one of the realities of the business. If you have an in, use it. Don't be embarrassed to use it. If you don't have an in, find somebody. And that's my advice for the day.
Thank you very much, Joanne. Now I'd like to introduce Brian Sayans DeViteri and Stephanie Tofani to please come up. We have some special gifts we want to give to our panelists in thanking them for sharing their knowledge, their expertise with each and every one of you. Brian and Stephanie. By the way, Brian is our president of the Future Broadcasters of Broadcast Pioneers, and Stephanie is our vice president. They are the founding fathers and mothers, if you will, of the Future Broadcasters. Thank you very much for, and a little token there, if you want, one of you will open it. It's a watch with the Broadcast Pioneers logo on in your casual sports attire activity. I think you might find it enjoyable to wear. Thank you very much.